Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the second session by Thought Leaders 4 for Mediation Week. Today's session is going to be focusing on bringing other professionals into mediation, and we're joined here by an excellent number of speakers: Sarah Anticoni, Alison Bull, Tom Farrell, Helen Howcroft, and they're all going to share their experiences with us today. There'll be time for some questions at the end, so please do feel free to put them into the chat box and we'll keep an eye on those. So before I hand over to the speakers, I'm just going to give a short summary about mediation in general, given that we've got a range of attendees in the audience today. So as many of us will know, mediation is supposed to be a safe, confidential and without prejudice space within which our clients can discuss the practical arrangements arising out of their separation. The benefits are, as we know, that it can be a much quicker and cheaper process than the court system and allows our clients to reach outcomes that work for them. It's the flexibility, the bespoke nature of any agreements reached, and the fact that it's been reached with input by both parties that means any agreements or outcomes are likely to be adhered to in the future. Mediation isn't used solely for addressing the more traditional or financial arrangements on divorce. Mediation should be seen as an option for a broad range of family issues, including prenuptial agreements, discussing co-parenting or alternative family structures and arrangements, and the arrangements for unmarried cohabitees. The mediation process can also be used right at the start so that parties can discuss the divorce process, the divorce petition, and also things like how they're going to tell the children about their parents separating, so it helps set the right tone. Mediation should also not be seen as a standalone form of non-court dispute resolution. Those of us in the DR world know that there are a number of other options which may help alongside the mediation process, and we're going to explore some of those in the session tomorrow as well. I just wanted to say a quick word about mediation taking place remotely in the current climate. I and other mediators in our team have found that more clients are coming to us directly, often as a couple, rather than being referred through lawyers or other advisors. And this can mean that clients don't know very much about the mediation process or other DR options that are available and how they may help them in their situation. It also means that they're coming to us often unfiltered and without having had a space to consider how difficult the relationship breakdown has been and how, therefore, the mediation process may be for them. And that's why our initial meetings, or our MIAMs, are so important because we can explore with clients the issues that may need to be addressed in mediation, but also get an idea of what they need from us in order to help manage the process effectively. And in those cases, it's hugely important to clarify what the mediator's role is, put some strict boundaries in place, and help manage our clients' expectations. And this can be more difficult when they've had the chance to meet clients in person and the relationship that you've developed is purely online. The nature of mediation online is different. You can't observe and react to body language in the same way. And you need to ascertain also the arrangements at home, particularly if they're children and particularly if the clients are living under the same roof. A number of practical considerations. Often mediation taking place remotely have shorter sessions, and if we're meeting face-to-face, we've all experienced Zoom fatigue and the need just to manage that in terms of the time that we can devote to it. As I've mentioned, clients might be living under the same roof, so we need to consider with them where they're going to be for the mediation session, whether they're going to be in the same room or separate rooms, and also what their arrangements are for immediately before and after the mediation sessions, particularly if they need some separate time to decompress. Also considering with them whether they've got children at home, and to make sure that the children are away and out of earshot from any mediation session and looked after for that period. And then also, I guess, having an eye on internet issues and having a backup plan in case somebody drops off or their screens are freezing. There's lots of positive things I could say about mediation, probably don't have the time to do it now, but one thing that we've noticed and really focused on since the pandemic is co-mediation and the benefit of having another mediator with you for tech support, taking notes to make sure there's someone always engaging with the client and looking at body language, etc., but also giving the opportunity to collaborate with others from different professional backgrounds. Document sharing we found is often much more efficient when mediation is taking place remotely, whether that's in co-mediation or sole mediation, because if you're sharing your screen, for example, we know that everybody's looking at the same document, same page at the same time. And obviously, mediation has become a lot more flexible in terms of timing when it's taking place remotely. You don't necessarily have to factor in getting to an office and the time that all of that takes, and you can fit it into your day at your desk at home. And we've often found that some of the sessions are taking place in the evening, perhaps when children are in bed or out of the way. And then finally, for me, I just wanted to highlight the benefit of bringing other professionals into mediation. The strict family law aspects are rarely the only issues that a separating couple need to consider, and the benefit of bringing other professionals into or alongside the mediation process can be really significant. And so on that note, I'd like to introduce Sarah Anticoni. Sarah is a partner at Charles Russell Speechlys LLP. She trained with the FMA in 1995 and was awarded the Jordan's Family Mediator of the Year in 2016. Sarah is a sole and co-mediator on all issues, including financial and children issues. Chambers' High Net Worth Guide praises Sarah for her bringing a great human touch to the mediation process with sound judgment and common sense. And Sarah's going to talk to us first about bringing other lawyers into mediation sessions. Over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Connie. I'd like to start today with a quote from J.M. Barrie, who we will know wearing a different hat and nothing to do with mediation at all. But he said something which has always resonated with me when I start working with clients and with lawyers. He said, "Courage is the thing. All goes if courage goes." And in the next 5 minutes, I'm just going to explore a little bit about what it's like working with lawyers within mediation, but most importantly, focusing on clients. Because although some of you may be lawyers and some of you may also be mediators, some of you may potentially have been or will be clients at some stage, all of us have a slightly different perspective. But this is supposed to be a process which is client focused, not just the two people who may be sitting, two or other family members who may be sitting with you, but also their children and other family members. And so when thinking about, as a mediator, shall I work on my own or shall I work with anybody else? You've got to be confident about how you're going to handle that process. And the lawyers in turn, who are perhaps referring their very precious clients to you, also need to be confident that you know what you're doing. Clients, on the whole, most clients will only do this once. They will only get divorced once. And they will have had no previous experience of what mediation is. They'll have had no previous experience of what separation may be like or making future arrangements for children. And so we must remind ourselves of that when we think, is it a good idea to involve others beyond just a mediator? Lawyers historically were worried about mediators being a huge threat to work lives. But I think that having trained 25 years ago, it's quite obvious that there is work in all these different spheres, and that collaborating and working together and working to your strengths and being adaptive to what clients need is really where we are now in 2021. We should be able to work in a multidisciplinary approach. In some areas, I know that people always work in a co-mediation model, as Connie explained. And so for some of us who are old enough to remember where co-mediation was the only really allowed preferred model, we always had somebody from a therapeutic background sitting in the room with us. And lawyers used to sit there watching somebody from a therapeutic background not speaking and filling the silence and listening. And we all learned a lot from that. I think in recent years, there has been greater concern about how lawyers and mediators work together. And I want to explore a little bit about how that should work. Americans are much more geared to this than we are. In fact, in Lisa Parkinson's recent book, she references the fact that about 75% of US mediations have lawyers present, even in the family arena. Obviously, in commercial mediation, lawyers are always present, counsel are present, and it just emulates a court-based process. But here in England, we tend only to work, even in co-mediation, without lawyers present. And the main reason for that is quite a purist reason, which is that we mediators look at issues and explore issues with clients, whereas lawyers quite naturally look at positions. And so my comments really, I would say, fall into different types of cases. So lots of the work that mediators get, as Connie referenced, they are litigants in person and have had no input at all. On the upside for the couple is that if they are able to articulate what they want and what they feel, they can say so, and the mediator can, in a neutral, independent role, assist in identifying some options, exploring them, and perhaps coming to resolution. At that stage, they may very well want to go and cross-check with lawyers outside the process. But sometimes it may be helpful to have lawyers brought in. As Connie will know, because she and I worked together before, sometimes you can't really explain to people what the process is or give clients the confidence to embark upon it, even for one session, to see what it's like, to have your trusted lawyer bring you into the room and sit there just as moral support. But that really then comes to what the boundaries and barriers need to be. And I think it's incredibly important that the mediator leads and explains who is a speaker or has a role to play, which rooms everybody will sit in, and how they will be used. If that isn't explained before you've got everybody in the room, it unravels very quickly. But one of the most valuable tasks that mediators have is to listen and observe. And mediators can learn a lot from seeing who interacts. You can see whether the case is in fact being run by the lawyers. And I don't say that in a critical or disrespectful way. Nobody listening to this, or nobody on the panel, runs a case without taking instructions. But often they are more dominant than they perhaps think they are, or perhaps may not have listened carefully enough to what the clients want. So the key is harmonious working and setting the boundaries. I think that enabling clients to speak rather than be passive is really helpful, and lawyers in the room sometimes will help that. The great thing, of course, about Zoom is that we're all used to breakout rooms and dipping in and out, so we're quite used to having some quiet time and breaking in shorter sessions. Connie, I think that's a really good observation. Mediators should not be worried or threatened about lawyers joining. It's a great calling card. Lawyers can see how you work and what the process is. Remember, not all lawyers have experienced mediation either, so it's as useful for them as it may be for the client. On the whole, lawyers are very protective of their clients, and mediators are probably more experienced in going into areas which are not the obvious outcomes that may be imposed by a judge if the matter was litigated. And sometimes, and Alison, I'm sure will touch upon this, it's really important when we're talking about children. If you start off with a no order principle on children proceedings, if parents wish to come to an outcome which they can live with and which everybody feels is in the welfare interests of the child, then why should they not do that? After all, that is what they were doing during their marriage, bar social services and police intervening. I think speed is an important matter, and sometimes at the very end of resolving issues, when you've mediated it, it's really helpful to have lawyers possibly in another room and for the mediator to shuttle backwards and forwards to get a document drafted, rather than going memorandum of understanding and then on to court order. That's something which I think that increasingly clients really like. And I suppose finally, simply to say, quoting Daniel Barenboim, who said, "Everything is connected." And he said that in The Power of Music. He said, "The inclusion of all parties in a dialogue is not a guarantee for perfect harmony, but it certainly creates the conditions necessary for cooperation." And for that reason, I would support anybody that wishes to consider bringing lawyers in, but really it's a matter between the mediator and the parties. And lawyers need to understand that it is a different arena and a different process. Thank you. Back to Connie.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to hand over now to Alison. Alison Bull heads the Manchester family team at Mills & Reeve LLP. She's an accredited family, child inclusive and commercial mediator and collaborative practitioner. She assists clients with family disputes of all kinds. Chambers and partners refer to her as a leading light in the ADR world, an innovator, leader, and first-class mediator whose constant and consistent client-focused attitude ensures a favourable outcome. And Alison is going to talk to us about bringing a child-inclusive mediator into mediation. Thank you, Alison.
Thank you, Connie. So I'm going to tell you all a story to introduce how child-inclusive mediation can work. So if you're sitting comfortably in your homes, then I'll begin. Now, once upon a time, there was a couple called Mika and Frederick. Now, they met when they were at university in London. Mika was studying chemistry. She then went on to do a PhD, and then she secured an academic post. Frederick was studying medicine, and he eventually qualified into geriatrics. About 20 years ago, they got married. They continued living in London, and then along came their first child, Hannah, who is now 16. Just after Hannah was born, they moved back up to the northwest. That was where Mika has lived since she was aged 8. Her parents moved to Manchester from Japan. She's British, though. Frederick actually grew up in London. He was born there. His parents actually are German, and they separated when he was very young. So they both secured work in the northwest, and they had childcare on hand from Mika's parents. And then they had another 2 children, Amy and May. Amy is 12 now, and May is 8. And actually, they had a very happy marriage for many years. But then when May started at primary school, Mika started increasing her work, and life became really very busy. I'm sure many of us can relate to that. And the relationship became more difficult. They started growing apart. And Frederick formed a relationship with a colleague at work, and they became quite close. When Mika found out about this, then she and Frederick had a conversation. They went to marriage guidance counselling for a while to see if they could resolve matters. Then they decided that they would separate. So last summer, they sat down with the children together and told them what was going to happen. And then Frederick moved into a rented property nearby. They both went to mediation with my mediator colleague and started the process of trying to resolve all the issues that they had to resolve. Progress is being made in relation to financial matters. They've obviously both got their own resources, but they also have significant inherited wealth. Things got a bit more tricky in relation to the children, though. So Frederick is adamant that he has to be an equal parent. He feels he really lost out as a child because he didn't really see his dad very much after his parents separated. And he said that the girls, especially the younger 2, have told him that they want to see him more. At the moment, he sees them at the weekends and for tea during the week. And Mika said that she thought it was best for the children to be based with her during the week, to have tea with their dad as they have been, and to stay with him at weekends. And she said that that was what the children had told her that they would be happy with. And then during this process, on the advice of a friend, Mika applied to the child maintenance service. And then from there on, that really caused quite a lot of problems. And both parents now are adamant that the other one is mainly motivated by money. So my mediator colleague suggested that perhaps I should meet with the girls so that they would be able to have their voices heard. And for those of you who are mediators and are listening, you'll know very well that the FMC Code of Practice says that children who are aged 10 or over should be offered the opportunity to meet with a mediator if they wish to do so. And I don't know whether many of you were in attendance at the webinar yesterday about the Family Solutions Group report, but of course that emphasises the importance of making sure that children have a voice in their arrangements. It's not really rocket science, is it? But the system as it is now is primarily legal, and it really doesn't focus on children's welfare needs, despite supposedly doing so. So my colleague's very well aware of that. So he talked with the parents initially about how it could work, bringing me in to meet with the children. He explained some of the ground rules around child-inclusive mediation and some of the difficulties because of the pandemic in particular. And then he briefed me very fully on the background as well to the family and how the mediation had been going so far. And there is so much I could tell you about this family, which incidentally are fictional, but based on a combination of many families I've worked with over the years, if only we had more time. So I then joined one of the mediation meetings by Zoom to introduce myself to the parents and actually to hear from them about their children. You know, what sort of girls are they? What are their interests? What are their hobbies? You know, what are they worried about? What are their personalities? And to see some photos of them and to consider with Mika and Frederick whether it would be in the girls' best interests for me to meet with them. I then wrote to each of the girls separately to invite them to meet with me. And then both parents confirmed to me that they all wanted to meet with me. Although May's only 8, the parents said she's very vocal and she'd be very happy chatting with me and she wouldn't want to be left out. So I agreed that that was fine. I would meet with them, all 3 of them. So then we had to set up the meeting. And since we were meeting by Zoom, I met initially just with each parent and the children, just to meet the children for a really short 5-minute chat. And so I could see them with their children in both homes, and both parents were on board with the process. And then I met with the children for a longer period of time. They happened to be with Mika at the time in the family home. So Mika set it up and then she took the dog for a walk so that I could then talk with the children privately. And I met with all 3 of them together to start with, and then with Hannah on her own because she'd asked that she could speak with me separately. And my mediator colleague joined all of these calls as well. So of course there needed to be someone else in the meeting as a chaperone, but it made sense for him to be able to hear everything that was going on as well. So then after I'd met with the children, which was an absolute privilege, as it always is to meet with children in this situation, I then fed back to the parents later the same day when the girls were at Mika's parents. They were in a childcare bubble with them. So I'd like to tell you that they all lived happily ever after, because that's how, you know, stories are supposed to end. But of course, this is real life. And actually the story is ongoing as things stand.
Thank you, Alison. We're going to have some questions at the end, but just jump in with a couple. So what did the children say to you in the fictional scenario?
So they said that they all like going to their dad's to see him. But Hannah said, and she spoke mostly for the 3 of them, although the other 2 did chip in, she said that she felt like they were still just staying there. It wasn't a home. It was difficult not having their own things there. And the younger 2 agreed about that and mentioned various things that they'd normally have when they were at home. And Hannah said that she thought it would work better if they could have some of their things at their dad's. And Amy in particular was missing the dog a lot. So there was something around the dog. Hannah said she'd like to have some time at weekends at home. And although it didn't matter very much at the moment, she was quite concerned about what would happen when, you know, lockdown ends eventually and she's able to meet up with her friends, because she'd want to be able to do that at weekends and not feel tied to being in either home, actually. She also said that she didn't want her dad's girlfriend to be there when she went to his house at the weekends, although she was a bit worried about raising that with him. And she also said that she was worried about how her mum was coping when they weren't there. Both Hannah and Amy, so the 2 older, said they wouldn't mind staying overnight with their dad during the week, especially if they weren't going to see him at the weekend. But they thought that their mum wouldn't like them to do that because he lets them stay up later at night. And they thought they would need to go back to the home that they still obviously regard as home after school, or at the moment during the day when they're being homeschooled, because their dad actually works really long hours, and their mum is obviously at the moment mainly working from home and would be able to continue doing that a bit. And then when I spoke to Hannah on her own, I asked her obviously what she'd like to talk with me about, and she said she wanted to really understand what was happening and what the next steps would be. She didn't like to ask her mum and dad about that. She didn't want to trouble them, and they all seemed busy trying to sort everything out. And she also said that she'd like to have some time with each of her mum and dad separately when the younger 2 girls weren't there. And she wanted to be able to stay at home at weekends if she wanted to, without feeling she had to go to her dad's to look after the girls, which is obviously how it was feeling a bit for her. And then obviously checked with all of the children to what extent they were happy for me to share what they'd said to me with their parents. And in this instance, all of them were very happy for me to share openly with their parents anything that they had said, although Hannah was a little anxious that I explain in relation to her dad's girlfriend that it wasn't that she didn't want to see her particularly, but she just wanted to have time with her dad, and that might change as things progressed. So
Thank
hopefully
you.
that's a question, Connie.
Yeah, and one just came in saying, did you tell the parents everything that the girl said? And it sounds like in that situation you did, and you'd asked their permission, and it was okayed.
Yeah, because they had given me permission to do so, I did feedback everything that they told me, and also trying to pull out from that some of the themes that I had taken from the conversation that I had had with them. So then there was a lot to work with based on what the girls had said. So they still said they didn't feel at home when they were at their dad's. So, and I could see both parents immediately thinking about actually how they could make that better for their girls.
And you can see that some of them were sort of practical tips, things that might actually be fairly easy to fix, and then other were sort of larger issues that might need further exploration.
Because the parents are busy with their own lives, and they're just some things that they hadn't thought about actually.
And what happened when you fed back to the parents?
Well, as well as explaining that the issue I've just mentioned about them not feeling at home, I fed back all of the other sort of themes that came out of the discussion. So there's a bit about ground rules during the week about bedtime. So it was a conversation parents could have about that. The dog featured in the conversation, the involvement of the girlfriend, Hannah spending time with each of them separately on her own, and perhaps not feeling she had to look after the younger two. Keeping Hannah more informed about the process, and I think actually keeping all of the children perhaps more informed, just in an appropriate way for their ages, but also giving them space where they could ask questions, which obviously Hannah hadn't felt able to do so. And then there was a bit of a theme around worries, the worries expressed by Hannah overtly, but then also the underlying anxieties and worries that could pick up from the conversation about not upsetting either parent, looking after them, worries about mum being on her own. So there was a lot to work with, and the feedback session, I don't use to start to work on those things, because that's something that then my mediator colleague will work with the parents on going forward, but really to identify them and note the parents' comments, because they, in my experience, they do quite quickly start suggesting solutions to some of these, because fundamentally they just want their kids to be okay. Both listen really intently and quite subdued, which I think it's a big thing, listening to a stranger report back what your children have said to them. But in my experience, I'd say the exercise is so important, obviously for the children to have a voice, but it's also very powerful in facilitating the parents to really focus on how their children are feeling at that point in time. So I think that's the story of Mika, Frederick, Hannah, Amy and May so far. Hopefully it's an introduction as to how child inclusive mediation can work for those of you who haven't experienced it before. But I'll hand back to you, Connie.
Thank you very much. So now I'm going to introduce Tom and Helen, both IFAs. Tom Farrell is an accredited all issues family mediator and independent financial planner. He runs a specialist practice in central London and Suffolk, offering mediation, financial neutral and financial coaching services across all processes, as well as regulated financial planning and implementation advice. He's a passionate advocate for systemic practice. He sits on Resolution's National Committee and also helps to run their specialist accreditation scheme for financial advisors. And Helen is passionate about financial planning. Having gone through her own divorce, it's really made her understand how vulnerable individuals are during this period in their life. With her career starting in the early 90s, she's a chartered financial planner with a focus on pensions. She established Equanimity IFA in 2004, a central London-based financial planning firm, and she's extensive experience advising clients going through divorce, and her main areas of work are as a financial coach, analysing pensions and the finances as part of a divorce settlement, as well as writing mortgage capacity reports. And so Helen and Tom are going to have a chat to us about bringing IFAs into the mediation process. Over to you both. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Connie. Tom, should we start off with just having a chat about the difference between a financial neutral and what we do as financial advisors and regulated activity?
Yeah, I think that would be a very good idea, because I think this term financial neutral terminology is one of the things we grapple with all the time in our work, in terms of making sure we're not using it inadvisedly. The financial neutral role was really developed through the onset of collaborative practice, as many participants today may well know. And it's really important to understand that that is actually a role that could be brought into pretty much any type of process. Mediation in particular actually can be very effective, but that it's a generic role. It's not a regulated financial advisory role. So you're not recommending products or talking about what you should be investing in or giving direct tax advice. It's very much about enabling people within that process to understand the financial information they've got to deal with, to grapple with, to level playing fields in terms of financial understanding, and to look in a more generic way about what's possible and what's not possible, and to flag up potential issues in terms of tax or planning, so that things aren't missed, perhaps at an earlier stage. But it is very definitely has a line drawn between that generic activity, that neutral generic role, and that of the regulated financial advisor. I don't know about you, Helen, but when I talk in terms of coaching, I see that as a generic role as well. It's not a direct advisory role. It's about support work. You do quite a bit of coaching work, don't you?
Absolutely. I was going to say, from my point of view, especially when people are going through divorce, or especially women, I feel like I could say this, that women are generally, and I will be, I am going to be a bit stereotypical here, but a lot of the women that I work with, their husbands are the ones who have been running the family finances. When they're coming into a mediation process and going through a divorce, they're generally at a very different level of understanding of what the family finances are, how much they're spending, what life generally means, how much they need spent on a property, all of those kind of things. They're coming to it at a disadvantage. So then us working with the clients to support, especially that vulnerable individual, is really important, because for me, our role then is very much coaching that individual and actually empowering that individual to understand, or to have a better understanding of what the finances are. But equally, when they are looking at separating the finances and agreeing some kind of settlement, knowing what those numbers actually mean, because a lot of people that I deal with, they tell me that they've been asked to look at a settlement and to say whether it's fine or not, but they don't understand the practicalities and what it means. And so that for me is what the coaching role is very much supporting them on that aspect.
I couldn't agree more. I think you very often have this imbalance, particularly within mediation, where people are sitting around a table, or virtually round the table nowadays, talking with their mediator about what it is they've got, what it is they want to try and achieve in terms of a sensible financial settlement for their family. But if you plug in that emotional context to the work, the fact that one or other party may have had absolutely no direct experience of making these big financial decisions, and all of a sudden they're forced into this position where they have to make a whole raft of them about housing, about pensions, about investments, about all sorts of things. And if they don't have that direct experience, there's a real need to give them support to help them get to the point where they can confidently go back into mediation and know what it is they want to say, and understand better what it is that's being talked about. Absolutely vital role.
Yeah.
What other things do you think would be
I was going to say what comes on really well from that is actually the cash flow modelling aspect of the work that both of us do, because quite often, again, especially when dealing with the vulnerable clients, but especially when you have people going through a difficult time as this is, or that they're coming from it from a far lesser knowledge in relation to finances, having the ability for us as advisors or coaches to actually cash flow model someone's finances on a screen, and rather than be talking at the client using terms like pensions and ISAs and tax and things which for lots of people they just don't want to, and they don't understand what really goes on underneath the scenes with pensions and things. But actually with the cash flow modelling, for us to be able to use in a very simple graphical format whether the settlement or what's been offered is going to enable them to maintain their current standard of living or not, for me is incredibly powerful, because even if the person that you're advising doesn't really understand what's going on, at least they're going to understand whether what is on offer is enough and is going to enable them to carry on.
Shall I? I've got a bit of cash flow modelling up on the screen, so I could share that with everybody while we're talking about it, just briefly. I absolutely agree with what you've said there. So this is the particular system that I use. I don't know if you use the same one, Helen?
Yeah, we use the same one.
Right. And basically what this enables us to do is to give a graphical representation. At the bottom here is this person's sort of timeline. This is a fictitious client. But with this client, I've been modeling all sorts of different offers and possibilities that have been sort of batting backwards and forwards within mediation, and just modeling them in a very broad sense to show what's possible and what's not. And this particular client is absolutely adamant that she wants to remain in the family home. She wants that to be a part of her settlement. She wants that solid base for her and for her children for the next 5-6 years. As you can see that the children sort of get over the age of 21 by about the time that she's the age of 60. She's just beginning to develop a later life career. And she's very keen, she works from home, she's very keen to be able to stay put. But as a result of that, because she lives in central London and this property is worth £2 and a bit million, the overall settlement is therefore very skewed towards property. And it means that the balance that's being struck effectively gives her less of everything else in order to achieve what is actually her most important objective within the settlement. And there are very obvious concerns here from her legal advisors and other people she's talking to that perhaps she's allowing that to override what might otherwise be a practical solution where the house was sold and everybody bought a new place to live in at a lesser level. And what we did here was just to model on the basis of what's being proposed what it is she would end up with against her expenditure. And using these models, when things turn red, that's usually bad. And what that means here is that she's effectively, by the time she's the age of 71, exhausted all the other resources that are being afforded as a part of this settlement. So pension shares and capital, her existing savings. It allows for her earned income and her state pension. It allows for flexible withdrawal from all her other pensions, and it calculates tax and it looks at all of these things. But this is obviously quite a scary proposition for her if she sticks to her guns and really wants to stick with the family home, that she's going to run out of money by this point. But what we can actually do at that point is to model a downsizing event and say, well, what if you stuck with that settlement till you were 70? The kids are free and clear, you've developed your career, but perhaps now you're sort of winding things down and you don't need the big house anymore. And you effectively sell your house for half, for whatever it's worth at that point, and spend half of it on a smaller home and reinvest the rest of the capital. And by moving that downsize event to that point, we can then see I'll just change the graph. So this downsize event then happens at the age of 70. She sells the property, she reinvests the proceeds, and using that, you can see that the red all disappears, and she actually ends up at the end of that, her actuarial lifetime anyway, a settlement that could potentially work for her. So it's that, I don't know about you, but I think it's these sort of very simple, one can actually drill down into immense amounts of detail using this system, but it's the simplicity of it that works for people, actually, this graphical representation.
Yeah, absolutely. But also, involving us within a mediation process, I think one of the key roles that we have is actually that sense check, the reality check of whether what is being put on the table and being negotiated, whether it's actually workable in the first place, and whether it works for both parties. I'm sure you have, Tom, but I've taken numerous calls over the last few years where you get a phone call from one party going, I've agreed this deal, and I'm paying this level of maintenance, and now 6 months on, I'm going into debt every month because the husband has agreed a far higher level of maintenance that he could anywhere near afford to maintain any decent lifestyle, but because they've gone through that process without having that financial input, it was just about getting the deal done rather than actually seeing whether it was workable in the first place.
Absolutely. I think one of the issues that we all grapple with when we work within these processes, and particularly mediators, actually, I think to an extent, the way divorce works is that one is forced to take this weird snapshot of the way things are now and divvy everything up and move on. And the element of it that gets missed very often is just doing that piece of work with somebody to say, well, okay, if you did that, what will your future look like? What does the whole of the rest of your life look like if you do that? And how does it affect the person that you're divorcing? How do both sides of that equation look? What do your futures actually look like? And by having those financial conversations with somebody appropriately skilled within the sessions themselves and separately outside the sessions, because I very often will work just with the mediation clients myself or individually with clients, with the mediators that I work with a lot, where the trust is built up to the extent that we are genuinely working as a team and sharing information in that way, then if you can, as you say, sense check and reality test what's being proposed, and sometimes play devil's advocate to the extent that you challenge certain assumptions in terms of what's being looked at or ways that things are being achieved, that you can very often create very imaginative solutions. And that's the beauty of mediation, of course, that it allows for families to be imaginative about creating solutions for their futures. And so that plugging that bit in is really vital, isn't it?
But then equally, Tom, I think that's a really important part of what we do as well, is actually bringing our experience and our knowledge of the different products and different facets that the clients have within their assets to actually see how best to utilize those. I'm sure you do as well, but I see so many mistakes where people have just blindly gone and split certain pensions, or they've just cashed in investments, and had they actually used a professional like us, they could have actually created wealth, or certainly not been chucking money at the tax man just because some foresight hadn't been given into that finance in the first place, and how best to separate those finances.
Yeah, I think, I sort of do bash on about this quite a lot with the mediators that I talk to about when to bring a financial specialist into your mediation if things are looking even slightly complicated, that just getting that sort of weather eye on something right from the outset, just to set a couple of alarm bells or flags raised about tax, about things that might need to be considered during the tax year of the date of separation, issues that might occur if things aren't actioned relatively swiftly. And things that might be missed, like deliberately creating losses as a part of a settlement in order to offset against potential gains later, or things that could save an awful lot of money and frankly dwarf the costs of the process itself, that are sort of meat and drink for good financial planners, because it's what we do day in, day out with our clients. And if we've got the skill set to be able to plug those skills into the mediation process in an effective way and a sensitive way, then it can be a tremendously useful tool for mediators to sort of bring into their process, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've also come across some financial agreements that actually are just unworkable when they're presented to you to actually put them into practice, where wives are being awarded the family home, but actually they can't raise the mortgage and things in the first place, or there's issues to do the finances. And I think that actually, had we been involved in the first place, we would have been able to get hold of those as part of the process to save it having to then be reopened again.
I think also working as a trusted neutral, if you're a financial neutral within that process, you can identify very early on which, if not both, people are going to need what ongoing professional advice and signpost them to the right people, so that you keep momentum going. And so often in these processes, momentum is absolutely key to getting things done. If you can identify that one person is actually going to need some regulated financial advice to implement their pension sharing orders, and that effectively they might hit another brick wall there in terms of their decision making, because they haven't been through that process yet with a financial advisor. So you can create these parallel processes to keep things running smoothly, to sort of project manage the financial aspect of the settlement in that way, and find people, the right people to work with, and also help with sort of more detailed technical issues like actuarial reports and instructing actuaries and all of those things that people are far more aware of, I think, than they used to be, particularly since the advent of the PAG report, which is just a tremendous document, I think. But there is a role to be played there, and I think it's up to the mediators to understand it, to spend a bit of time exploring that and finding the people that they can work with.
I think what I'd be saying is that mediators shouldn't be scared of including or involving a financial neutral or financial advisor within the process, because actually we really do deliver significant benefits and can actually really help with the overall process, whether that is helping raise the confidence of the one party or actually bringing our technical knowledge and our expertise to really help achieve that settlement that works for everyone, and actually brings the process to a far better conclusion altogether.
Yeah. Well, I think we've pretty much covered our little bullet points, haven't we? So back to you, Connie.
Thank you very, very much. We've had some questions coming through. So as this one's just popped up, I might start with you both, Tom and Helen, if that's okay. Just referring to the software that you had on screen sharing for us, a comment that they'd love to share this with clients, and asking about whether either you guys coming in or that software is expensive, and because obviously not all of our clients have got hundreds of thousands of fees that they could use for the process. So just asking a bit about the cost.
What I'm going to say first of all with that is that it's a very complex piece of kit that if it's in the wrong hands and used incorrectly, it can produce very, very, very inaccurate data in the first place, because a lot of it is to do with the assumptions that we're programming into it in the first place. To use that piece of kit, it is hours of programming to get it to show what we want the system to be delivering as an outcome in the first place. So as an advisor, I would be very, very hesitant for anybody to be wanting to use that themselves, because it could, it's, you know, it's not something that I've been using that system for the last 8 years, and you know, it's, you know, Tom's saying it's a really complex piece of kit.
And in terms of your fees, then bringing you guys to use the kit into mediation sessions?
Well, I simply time charge for my time. I have a straight hourly rate, and I much prefer to work live in the room with the mediator and parachute in and out of people's processes as they feel they need me. If there's some modelling to do, I will always agree a fixed cost for getting that model up and running. And most importantly, as Helen has said, agree the assumptions that are going to be made. So, you know, we are very often sort of hidebound by things like Duxbury tables and the assumptions that they make. And we need to be careful about assumptions and understanding them. So part of that whole process is to pull that together as a model that makes sense to everybody and everybody trusts. And frankly, for us, having used these systems for a great number of years and getting very, you know, skilled at putting them together, it's much quicker and cheaper for us to put those models together and then come back to another session and present them. And they're designed to run live in the room. And that's the beauty of them, that people can have ideas. And if someone's good enough at using that software, they can actually model those ideas instantly and show the effect of them. It's incredibly powerful.
Lovely, thank you. Another question I might direct to you, Sarah, if that's okay. Are there any issues facing mediators at the moment, you think, in the current climate, making mediation more difficult given the current climate?
I think you raised the point about domestic abuse screening. I think we've got an increasing number of people who are considering mediating, a lot of people before they separate and a lot of people in their own homes. And I think that most of us are quite used to asking people to flip their laptops around to confirm who is or is not in the house, but to really think through about what happens when you get to an impasse or you do not resolve matters, what happens next. I'm particularly concerned about the elderly. I think that Tom and Helen demonstrate beautifully their ease with figures and dipping in and out of programs to demonstrate that. The visuals are so well received, but often we have to remember that some people can't process data very easily. So just sharing a screen and losing eye contact, you might lose the trust of somebody. For us, we may switch screens very easily and move on to another client or move roles from being a mediator to advisor. But when the client switches off, they may still be in the same room they were sitting in, fretting and not having others. And I think what I've heard from this session more than anything else is we're like pieces of a jigsaw, and each of us have a role to play. And as long as we communicate well with each other and use our professionalism to bring in people where necessary, that should always assist our clients. They shouldn't sit there thinking, oh, we're just being sold yet another thing which I don't need. A bit like the old days when you used to get shoe polish and, you know, shoe stretchers when you left having bought shoes. And I think that's not what we're doing. What we're saying is each of us do very different skills, and at different moments in a process, you may need to rely upon us. We don't have to be there all the time, and those resources can be used well. But I think at the moment, with everybody stuck inside, my biggest concern is that what happens after I finish a session. And I've really got to be careful about that, especially with children. And Alison may have a different view.
I'll come to you, Alison, next, if that's okay. Can you just talk us through what you think the pros and cons are of involving a child inclusive mediator partway through a mediation, like in the example that you've described to us earlier?
Yeah, I'm sure, although I will just say I agree entirely with what Sarah has said, and it's particularly important when you might have children in the house as well. It's really tricky, I think. So the pros and cons, because there really are pros and cons, and having done it both ways, I think one of the pros is that it enables the children to have a separate voice. I listen to them hear their views, feed them back, and then I'm out of the process. So I think that's quite helpful in terms of, it's quite powerful. It also avoids the risk of parents feeling that the mediator is partial if they're delivering a message which favours one or the other. And inevitably those messages do favour one or the other. Sometimes it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other, but sometimes it isn't. And that can then make the ongoing process more tricky. It involves an element of co-mediation, and you talked about that, Connie, and you, Sarah, and actually I think that's a hugely valuable thing to have, where you've got a different perspective, a different dimension, a shift in the dynamic actually in the room, which can be helpful, and it's without the cost of having 2 mediators present throughout. So I found that helpful. And I think if the mediators are from the same organisation, that obviously makes the administration much easier, but it doesn't mean it can't be done if you're in a different organisation. And one of the huge benefits of where we are at the moment is anyone can involve a child inclusive mediator wherever you are in the country, which makes it a bit easier, because I think there still can be difficult to find somebody who can do this. But on the downside, now, as coming in just to do the mediation, to meet with the children, I feel that my knowledge and my understanding of the family, of the dynamic, is more superficial than it is if I've been working with them throughout. And I've certainly worked with families where that knowledge and understanding has really helped me, in addition to meeting with the children, to be able to help those parents to resolve their issues. There is a duplication of cost of having 2 mediators present in the room. It's not essential, because you can have a non-mediator chaperone. And I did see there was a question raised about chaperones, and the answer to that is yes, we'll always have a chaperone when I meet with children, and that's true whether it's on Zoom or face-to-face. But usually I meet with my executive assistant, who's a mum, has got kids, and just makes herself fade into the background somewhat and look after the kids, really help me to do that. So there are some practicalities of arranging meetings which are slightly more difficult, because you've got another person involved, but again, at the moment that's really pretty easy to do. And there's some additional setup admin involved if you're not in the same organisation. Well, there is a bit more admin anyway, but there's even more if you're from different organisations. You've got to deal with client inception and that sort of thing, but that's relatively minor. I think the most important thing is that we enable this to happen for kids. It is so important that they can have a voice. These are their arrangements, they're going to affect them for the rest of their lives, and so I think it's more important that happens than whether it's bringing somebody in from outside as a child inclusive mediator into the mediation, or whether it's having the same mediator throughout who's qualified to do child inclusive mediation. Hopefully that answers your question, Connie.
Absolutely. And another one has popped up just on that point as to whether or what your views are about being the mediator and also speaking to the children as the mediator, and whether that causes any difficulties, or your views on that.
I haven't found it to be a difficulty so far, but I can see that it could be. I think the key thing is that you've built a really strong relationship with both of the parents before it happens, and that they have your trust. And actually, it's really key that it only happens if it's going to be a positive thing for children. So I think, in a situation where that does cause a big problem, I'd query whether perhaps it wasn't the right thing to do in the first place. That's the overall rule, is that this experience for the children has got to be positive, not negative, and all the preparatory work around it's aimed at making sure that that's the case. So,
thank you. And I'm just going to hand back over to Tom, if that's okay. Can you let us know what the greatest obstacles to bringing financial professionals into the mediation process are?
Okay. So much of what everyone else has said today has resonated with me, and I'm mindful of Sarah's quote when she spoke about courage. And I think courage is one of the obstacles, actually. I'd add another word to that, and it's confidence. That Mediators, the worst thing you can do is sort of recognize as a mediator that somebody probably needs a bit of financial advice and maybe hand them a little list of a few people they might choose from. Because all you're doing is compounding the problem, actually. You're just creating a whole load more decisions. You need a confident referral, and you need to talk right from the get-go about the fact that you want to work as part of a team and that there are benefits to that and cost savings to that. And that takes a bit of courage and confidence. And very often the best way to get over that particular hurdle is to train together with the people you want to work with as a part of your team. Find those people, have coffee with them when we're allowed to have coffee with anybody, get used to talking to them, get used to working together in a room, even if you're just sort of role-playing stuff or doing some work together, then you'll build that confidence to very confidently make that referral. And the other thing, particularly when you're not part of the same firm, is to think about the practicalities of bringing other professionals into your process. So, for instance, as a financial neutral, I must co-sign the agreement to mediate. And so your agreement to mediate needs to have a box in it that allows for other professionals. Similarly, your terms and conditions and agreement to mediate need to talk about confidentiality, privilege, other professions, information sharing, and those people who are working as neutrals and financial advisors need to have an equivalent terms of business that talks about all of those things. So you need to get your ducks in a row, you need to be confident, and you need to know who it is you're going to talk to your clients about being a part of your team. And I think then it becomes a lot easier. And you find very, very little pushback from the clients. They get it.
Thank you. And I've got another question here for you, if that's okay, Sarah. Do you think it's useful to have a dialogue with the client's solicitors, even if the solicitors aren't attending mediation as well, or do you leave it to the clients to report back to their solicitors in respect of progress?
I think that's a good question, and I think, I'm sorry to say, it depends on the facts and the clients, but I think one needs to be open to it. And I think part of managing a process and remaining neutral and independent is to keep lawyers supporting their clients and doing the job that they may be doing very well, even if everything hasn't been resolved. So I often will ask, if lawyers are involved already supporting the clients, I will ask for certain specific documents to be sent to me by the lawyers, because lawyers like jobs to do and they don't like to be excluded from the process. And so I may have a three-way conversation. I mean, interestingly, of course, that's now emulated pretty much in arbitration as well. There will be a lawyers only discussion with an arbitrator. I think that's helpful, if only to reinforce clearly so both lawyers hear the same story at the same time about where those boundaries are, but also to say to the clients, the time and money that you have spent with these other people is not wasted. I will work with what I have already got. And I always say, perhaps it is because I'm the child of parents who were brought up post-war. I don't like to waste your time, anybody else's time, all the work that's already been done. But I do think we still have a responsibility to show that it's different and that they have got space to perhaps think more creatively, outside the box, safely. And that my job may well be, and Connie, you'll remember this on one of the particular one we worked on, where I then had to come back and say, look, just let the clients get to where they are. And then we in our wearing our hats, and you as lawyers, need to be creative as to how you will sell that to a judge or resolve it or satisfy yourself that neither of you are being negligent. But don't impose your professional concerns with outcomes that two people or indeed three people might be quite content with and actually works. I hope that answers.
Thank you. And I'm just conscious of time, so I think probably just one more question to you, Helen. Can all IFAs provide expert help?
Well, I think what I would say with that is that it really depends on what the help is that the client or the mediator needs in the first place. But what you will actually find is that the financial advisors and the advisors who are specialising in this area have already that inbuilt knowledge and expertise of the key things to be concerned about with clients going through a divorce, and whether that is key technical things that we need to take into account, such as capital gains tax planning that you can do, or dealing with lifetime allowance issues surrounding very high net worth, very large pensions, but equally someone who's actually very experienced at working and advising with vulnerable clients, because unless you're used to working with people who have who we would class as being vulnerable, most people would not understand that you have to talk to people in a totally different way when you're dealing with that vulnerability, because their ability to actually retain, a tenth of what we are talking to them about is very, very low indeed. So actually, we've honed our skills to be able to think about how we're going to be advising those clients and how we're going to support that client, not just during meetings, but in writing and following that up, so that they don't have to worry that all the advice we're giving them is all in one place. And then finally, a lot of the work we do as well is we're involving the solicitors as well. So we're used to dealing with the mediators, with the clients, with the solicitors, and we're used to all of the, not being funny, the legal jargon that goes alongside getting a divorce. I remember the first time going to a pod meeting and people talking about my-ams and for-me's, and I thought, what are these people talking about? So if you're new to this world, there is a lot to learn, and the process in the first place, that as financial advisors, we're just not taught that. It's something you definitely learn through time and experience of doing the work.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, I think that's all we've got time for. So thank you very, very much to everyone for their input, and I hope everybody watching found it useful, and have a good afternoon. Thank you.